I'm Jessica Eturralde, wife, mom, and journalist. I'm on a mission to uncover the power of care, what happens when it's present and when it's painfully absent. For the next few days, I'll be visiting Krakow, Poland. Poland's resilience shines through centuries of hardship. Yet, as Mark Twain noted, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And these lessons reveal the fact that if we don't learn to work together across our differences, the past atrocities can become the present. Right now, I'm actually seeing Krakow from a whole new perspective, from a Ferris wheel overlooking the city. As I float above the river bends and the rooftops, I can't help but think of the various layers of faith and history that have shaped this place. On my adventure, I'll meet one of the U.S.'s top experts on engaging across differences. He will share about his time in Krakow during the late 80s, when the entire country was undergoing significant change. We'll connect the dots between Polish history and a groundbreaking concept that's helping unlikely groups work together as we visit one of the oldest universities in Europe, hop a tram across the Wisła to an open-air memorial commemorating the Jewish Holocaust, and we'll wrap up the afternoon at Wawel Castle, Poland's most visited tourist site. Today, the religious landscape of Poland is largely defined by the Roman Catholic Church, with about 71% of the population identifying as Catholic. Smaller religious groups include Orthodox Christians, Protestants, Jehovah's Witnesses, Greek Catholics, and Pentecostals. Even smaller, minorities of Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and neo-pagans also exist, while about 7% of Poles have no religious affiliation. In the heart of Krakow, a city marked for centuries by culture, conflict, and coexistence, we're meeting with Dr. Chris Seiple, a scholar, diplomat, and the mind behind the cross-cultural religious literacy concept. Seiple is a veteran of 30-plus years in inclusive strategy. He is a senior fellow at Love Your Neighbor Community, has helped launch Templeton's Covenantal Pluralism Initiative, served as a senior advisor to the State Department and USAID, and as chair of the World Economic Forum's Faith Council. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a former Marine and prolific author. His journey began here, where he studied not only politics or theology, but the lived intersection of belief, identity, and power.
I was an international relations major and I had to go overseas, and I was also a soccer player. And I picked the one time that I could go in a place that spoke English, that had an English program, and it was Poland. I had no instinct to go to Poland, or never been a part of my life before. I had an instinct for Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and I'd been taking Russian as a part of my international relations major. So Poland was the place because it fit the confluence of all those different factors. Spring of 1988, I came to Poland. I loved it so much that I came back in the fall of 1989. And it was during those two experiences, the spring of 1988, when there were strikes, student strikes against the Polish communist government. And in 1989, when the Polish government actually had a free election, and then the Berlin Wall came down. And I was in Prague the night the Velvet Revolution started. So the combination of those two experiences in the spring of 1988 and the fall of 1989 taught me much more than I realized at the time. It taught me about freedom. It taught me about the power of faith. It taught me about civil society and when it works together with all the elements of society. I had no idea that the students had revolted against the communists in 1968, that the workers were doing the same, that they were brought together by something called the KOR, with lawyers protecting society, defense of society, that brought the top down of government officials and lawyers together with students and workers from the bottom up. And all that took final form over 20 years in Gdansk in 1980, when Lech Wałęsa brought solidarity out, and then the Pope, who was from Krakow, who became the first non-Italian Pope in 455 years. How do you explain that? Well, people look to the divine, but all these factors, however you explain it, came together in 1988 and 1989, and I was here accidentally. I would call it divine serendipity, but I was here accidentally, and I was not thinking about these things at all, of what would become cross-cultural religious literacy. It became the foundations for what would become cross-cultural religious literacy, but I had no idea then. But I had to experience fear, faith, and freedom as the Polish people had experienced it before I could understand what it meant and why it was so important, and why my own country was so important.
It's interesting to imagine Chris in the streets of Krakow and Prague around the fall of communism, surrounded by students, workers, and lawyers rising up, longing for freedom and even at times united by faith. It seems that being in Poland during those pivotal moments opened Chris's eyes to what those words truly mean when they're tested. So, what is cross-cultural religious literacy, and why should the average person care about it?
Well, in a sentence, cross-cultural religious literacy is you, the other, and what you do together. It's born of my experiences around the world where I figured out, which is not that much to figure out, that there's no issue, no challenge that can be solved by yourself. So it's not a question of if, but when you have to partner with somebody who doesn't look, act, vote, or pray like you do. So how do you cross toward them and understand how they think of themselves so that you can get something done together? People should care about cross-cultural religious literacy because they live in a world where every single challenge they face, the global challenges are local challenges, the environment, extremism, sexual trafficking, you name the topic, it's a global challenge. So how do I solve it? I can't solve it by myself. I have to engage somebody else who doesn't look or act or vote, pray like I do. So cross-cultural religious literacy provides competencies on how to think about engaging that other person, but also skills of what you do together. So it's you, the other, and what you do together.
Okay, so this term, cross-cultural religious literacy, or CCRL, is actually an academic term for an action and attitude that many of us who want to show kindness are already doing, but with a faith focus. I want to connect, or I have a problem in my community. I can't solve it by myself. There are others around me who share the problem, but we have different faiths, and perhaps we, or even others in our communities, have never really said a word to one another.
Do you all want some pierogi? There's 8 minimum. 8 minimum. Can you all eat like 2 or 3 each? How about you?
Perhaps we're afraid of them, afraid of disrupting our own faith. Perhaps we believe stereotypes, and yet we still have to work together. Or maybe we just want to show that we care more, to love our neighbors better. I can see this CCRL concept is more about engaging difference, not ignoring the differences or belittling those who have a different opinion. So are you concerned about it blending in with this thought of interfaith, or how is this different from tolerance that we hear about?
Great question. Tolerance and interfaith are not bad words, but let me be perhaps a little glib and contrast them with other words. Nobody likes to be tolerated. They want to be respected. So we want to move beyond tolerance to respect of the other person. Now, I don't expect you to respect my beliefs and behavior, but I do expect you to respect my inherent dignity. And no matter one's moral frameworks, from secular humanism to a believer in God, everybody allows for the fact that each human has dignity. So I want to respect you and not tolerate you. Interfaith is a good word, but interfaith sometimes means let's cooperate and graduate. All roads lead to heaven. Multi-faith says there are irreconcilable theological differences. And I need to respect and understand why you differ from me and how we understand the eternal. And the paradox is that when I respect how you think differently about that, we actually accelerate practical collaboration. Because when there's respect, you understand the essence of my identity. I happen to be a Christian. And I feel that respect. That means we're going to work together faster because trust begins to take place where there's respect. And that's why we want to move beyond tolerance. Tolerance is not a bad word. I'd rather have tolerance than people killing each other. But if we want to have enduring peace, we have to move beyond tolerance into mutual respect. And to do that, we have to be able to engage one another. And that's what CCRL, cross-cultural religious literacy, helps people do. It equips them to engage people and build mutual respect and solve common challenges.
What's so interesting about being back here in 2025 compared to 1988 is there are all these tourists. There were no tourists in 1988. Nobody came to communist Poland. There was just these 16 students from America, and we stood out like a sore thumb in communist Poland. But the Poles are the Poles, and they welcomed us, and they were gracious, and that's why it's such an indelible memory for me.
So earlier when you were talking about your mission, I'm just curious to know what gets in the way?
Oh, that's a great question. The biggest thing that I've seen in my years since living here is what I first witnessed here, and that is a mindset that does not want to change. In the communist countries, it's basically a Soviet mindset. And the Soviet mindset is everybody does this way, and it's top-down control. And now it's bottom-up. So back in 1988, these tourists would only come because you had to go through all these processes and be checked out to come. But now with a free Poland, 12 million people come a year, 1 million a month, and they see Polish history. It's phenomenal. So a mindset is the biggest enemy of change, as long as it's positive change.
That mindset, the one shaped by control and resistance to change, didn't emerge overnight. It was forged in trauma. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Just 16 days later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, following an earlier agreement signed with Germany to partition the country. Between 1940 and 1941, Soviet authorities deported over 1 million Polish citizens to labor camps across Siberia and Central Asia.
And the Soviets wanted to install communism eventually. So they rounded up all of the intelligentsia, the smart people, the civic leaders, the teachers, the people in the military, and they took them away to places outside of Minsk. And the biggest place of all was Katyn. And they murdered 22,000 Polish leaders. Now what makes this, that's just another fact in a history book for many Americans or people outside of Poland. But what made this real for me was when I came in 1988, we could not talk about it because it was communist, as I said. But I had to fulfill a language requirement for my major of international relations, which was Russian. And I had a Russian tutor. And she taught me, she's a Polish woman, she taught me Russian. But on the very last day, the very last session, because of the trust that developed between us, she shared how her father had been taken away to Katyn. She was an 8-year-old, and imagine if you can, a typical Polish house, 3 levels, men and guns coming up creaky steps in the middle of the night. You're an 8-year-old daughter, and you see your father pulled out of the bedroom and dragged away, never to be seen again. And imagine that she has to tell me this story in Russian, the language of the oppressor. And so we could not talk about Katyn in 1988. But in 1989, when I returned, they were starting to have open discussions because the first prime minister had been freely elected. And as you can see with this cross, it was erected in 1990, the year I graduated from college, 2 years after the fall of communism in Poland. So things can change quickly if there's faith and freedom, but we have to be able to talk about it. And that's why this story is so important, not just for all of Poland and its future leadership, but for people like me who don't know any better and can appreciate why freedom is so important.
Are you concerned that engaging those that believe differently, especially in high levels, will put you in a compromise?
Well, it could, but in the real world, people are always using each other. That's why self-interest is so important. There's mutual self-interest. When I go to Vietnam, a communist government, or when I went to China, Could I be accused by traditional human rights advocates of being too close to the government? You bet. But is that government looking for real solutions with its religious non-majorities, its minorities? Of course it is. And are those religious minorities going to talk to their government? Not really. So I go in and I serve a self-interest of the parties within the country. Part of the being a builder is that you walk with the people in their cultural context. And I don't come with my presuppositions as an American and say, you need to do this and you need to look like Thomas Jefferson, by the way, and not bring any of the humility that comes from the American experience, which is we had slaves. We didn't let women vote. But we evolved because we had the capacity to self-critique and self-correct. Well, guess what? Other countries are on their own paths. They're self-critiquing and self-correcting. Why wouldn't we be humble enough to walk with them? So I'm very comfortable accepting the accusations of traditional advocates. You're too close to people. Well, I'm close to people who live in these countries because they want to be close to me. And we have found a way to work together and build trust. And it's the trust is the currency for any challenge.
So this top-down, bottom-up concept, has there been a time where it's imbalanced? Perhaps you have resistance from the top-down, not wanting to work so much with the bottom, or even the bottom-up concept, not wanting to work with the top. Could you give an example of a time that there was challenges with this?
I worked in Tibet on China. I worked in China on Tibet. And the government did not want to understand Tibetans. They did not want to understand that the agricultural policies that they had introduced in 1959 when they took over Tibet had ruined the grasslands and ruined the agriculture. But when I began working with them, there was enough self-interest from both sides to say, we need to improve our agriculture. We need to have grasslands back. Okay, there's self-interest on both sides. Worked with local NGOs that were developing, literal grassroots NGOs that were developing grassroots to bring the grasslands back, and then worked with Han Chinese from the government in Beijing and brought them together. Han Chinese, officially atheist, communist, working with Tibetans who are Buddhist, and as a function of their faith, the earth is integral to Buddhism. And now they're talking with each other about how to solve this common challenge of bringing grass back to the grasslands.
Listening to Chris, it's clear that CCRL isn't just a framework, it's a way of living. It means planting seeds and trusting that what's sown in hard times might bloom years later. It means choosing to trust, to wait, and to act when the time is right. Chris calls it aggressive patience. And that spirit of thoughtful engagement leads us to our next stop, Poland's oldest university, where centuries of learning remind us that ideas and relationships can reshape the world.
Just a few minutes from our hotel is Jagiellonian University. Founded in 1364 by King Casimir the Great, it's one of Europe's oldest continually operating universities. For centuries, students all over Europe, including Copernicus, ducked through these Gothic arches to study law, medicine, and religion.
Founded by King Casimir the Great in 1364, this university was revived just a few decades later by Poland's first queen, Jadwiga, celebrated for her leadership and dedication to education. Her reforms expanded access to learning and, over time, opened doors for students from different faiths and social backgrounds. Today, Chris and I are stepping into the Collegium Majus, Poland's oldest university building and one of the oldest in Europe. It's incredible to think we're walking through the same halls where Copernicus studied over 500 years ago, right as the world stood on the edge of discovery.
And this guy, Copernicus, he studies here. And he's taught how to think and how to engage and how to think in an interdisciplinary fashion and bring religion and science together. And remember, science sometimes was at odds with God because everybody knew that the sun revolved around the earth. And because Copernicus is trained as a theologian and as a leader in the church, he's in a position to say, hey, I think science was made by God. I think the earth revolves around the sun, and I can prove it. So now I've got faith and science both consistent with belief in God. He challenged those around him at that time. This is the late 15th century. Christopher Columbus is coming across the ocean in 1492, and he's thinking, he had a little bit of science on how to guide him, but everybody thought the sun revolved around the earth. And for me, that's just a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift at the time, but for me, it's how do you challenge old ways of thinking in a way that honors your belief? And this is what cross-cultural religious literacy does. You get to challenge old ways of interrelationships that transcend conflict. You get rid of the old paradigm, but you maintain the principles of the belief, and then you move forward. Copernicus teaches us how to do that. And he studied here. He learned to think here. And that's what's so cool about this Collegium Maius at the Jagiellonian University.
Walking these halls where Copernicus once studied, I'm struck by how much courage it takes to challenge majority thinking, especially when it's tied to something as sacred as belief. Copernicus didn't separate his faith from science. He let one sharpen the other. Conversations like these remind me that education isn't just about facts or degrees. It's about learning how to think in a way that honors truth, honors people, and honors the beliefs that shape them.
You can't walk down a street in America or any country in the world without seeing people who don't pray like you do. So you have a choice. You can ignore them, but when push comes to shove and you need somebody to do something, which happens to everybody in life, there's going to come a time when you rely on somebody that is not like you. So how are you equipped to engage that person? Another way of thinking about this is we're developing a philosophy of partnership. I need to have a way of relating to the other, even if it's completely and totally based on self-interest. So that's the starting point, and that's where cross-cultural religious literacy is very different than interfaith and other types of stuff. We recognize self-interest in human nature. I need that person. Otherwise, I can't get done what I want to happen.
Can you give an example of self-interest?
I'm in a village and we got to dig a well. We got to have some water that serves the community. That half of the village is Muslim. This half of the village is Christian. The water table's underneath the dividing line. We're going to have to find a way to work together to share the water. I mean, there's countless examples of why we need each other. Governments, there is no country in the world, no state in the world that is one nation, one people. There are states with many nations, states with many peoples, and many religions. The state has to figure out a way where everybody feels satisfied within a common narrative of what it means to be a citizen of that state. You have to have policies that include everybody.
It's one thing to talk about partnership and inclusion in theory. It's another to see what happens when fear and division go unchecked. Chris reminded me how much depends on our willingness to work across lines of belief, even when it's uncomfortable. And that's why our next stop is so important. We're taking the tram to Ghetto Heroes Square, a place that remembers what happens when a society refuses to include, when fear turns neighbors into enemies. It's a stark contrast to the hope of collaboration, but it's also part of the same story. Kazimierz, now a vibrant district in Krakow, was once home to one of Europe's most influential Jewish communities. For centuries, Jews fleeing persecution in Western Europe found refuge here, welcomed by Polish kings who valued their skills and contributions. In 1335, King Kazimierz the Great relocated the Jewish community from beneath Wawel Castle to a new settlement he named after himself, Kazimierz. For nearly 600 years, this area was a mosaic of Polish and Jewish life, side by side. But that changed in 1941 when the Nazis established the Krakow Ghetto, not in Kazimierz, but across the river in Podgorze. There, over 16,000 Jews were trapped behind walls made of barbed wire and stone, walls deliberately shaped to mock them. The curved tops echoed both gravestones and the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Inside, residents faced extreme overcrowding, deprivation, and crushing restrictions on their freedom. But it's Ghetto Heroes Square that Chris and I are headed to, an open-air memorial in the Kazimierz district, just across the Wisła River from where Krakow's Jewish ghetto once trapped tens of thousands of Jews.
What you see here are empty chairs. I don't know if you've seen the movie Schindler's List.
I have, and I've heard that there's a museum around here.
Just around the corner, back there. But in Schindler's List, there's this scene from the Krakow ghetto where the Nazis come in and they throw the furniture onto the street and onto the square.
This square? Right here?
Outside the streets, yes. This was a market square before they turned it into a memorial. My dear friend and rabbi, Yehiel Pupko from Chicago, the third largest Polish city in the world, he said to me once that Jews are a family that became a religion, but are still a family. And the chairs represent family. They represent people being together, of shared meals, of breaking bread. And the Nazis came in and destroyed all of that. And when they destroyed the ghetto, where did they send the Jews? They sent them to Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is where there was what we call industrial genocide. They gassed 1.5 million Jews. They also killed hundreds of thousands of Poles and Gypsies or Roma, people who were handicapped, anybody who was deemed not to be capable of physical labor. But they had clear stereotypes of Jews and others, and they killed them all in Auschwitz. When I went to Auschwitz in 1988 for the first time, there were no tourists. And when you walked the grounds, you could still feel, even smell, the lingering presence of evil. And what you have with the lingering presence of evil, contrasted with here, is the presence of absence. And it's the presence of evil that caused the presence of absence. And these chairs help us remember what was done to the Jews in the ghetto and what was done to all the other Poles and Roma and other peoples also at Auschwitz. Millions killed in Auschwitz because they were Jewish, because they were another faith, because they were Roma, because they were handicapped. And this is why we do what we do, to prevent that from happening again.
I just feel like I want to take a moment to soak it all in. It's such a heavy thing. And it's so easy to kind of be numb as you learn the history, you hear about it, and you get used to it. So in your work, what do you do to combat that numbness? There's a sense, I'm sure, of needing to work and plow forward for the sake of doing the work.
Yeah.
How do you combat that numbness and keep anchored to the depth of the mission?
There's several answers there. When I returned to Poland last year with Rabbi Pupko, my friend, his son-in-law was with him, and he was at Auschwitz, and he had to stop going through. He could not take it. He could hear the screams of his people, of his family members being killed, and he just had to go off and cry and be alone. And so that's one way to deal with the numbness. But the numbness is greater the further you are away from the atrocity. And these atrocities and what took place at Auschwitz, remind us of what happened to the Jews as we consider the rise of anti-Semitism in Poland and around the world, but also what happens when you treat the other as an excuse for your own power. And you blame the other for something so that you can stay in power, as the Nazis did. They blamed the Jews for everything. And so that happens again and again. So part of the way that you deal with the numbness is to say, I won't let this happen again, and I will find ways to work on it. And there's different ways to prevent genocide and atrocities from happening. But for me, the greatest way, or what I feel called to do, is to something I call preemptive peace, which is cross-cultural religious literacy. It is equipping people to engage and move toward the other, not in a way that sacrifices the substance of one's beliefs, but but that brings the best of those beliefs forward and then respects the other person bringing the best of their beliefs forward. And we're not going to convert each other, but we're going to have a deeper respect for the dignity that we share as fellow humans. And I think for me, that's the only way that you prevent this from happening again, is that you start teaching this to children at an early age, at an appropriate age according to that context. But how do I talk to the other? Because if time goes by, the other will be used against other people and be used to manipulate your own mind about why we need to kill them. We've seen it again and again. Pol Pot in Cambodia, Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis. It is human nature to want to control and manage and put down people who are not like us. So how do we remind people, whatever their faith tradition, to see ourselves in the other? And that's my answer to your question. That's the only thing I know how to do.
For a millennium, Poland was home to the world's largest Jewish community. Under German occupation, Nazi Germany and collaborators murdered nearly the entire community in the Holocaust. Estimates from the U.S. State Department in 2023 put Poland's Jewish population at 20 to 40,000, less than 0.1% of the country.
We take in the somberness of this presence of absence to our right in the chairs on the square of heroes from the ghetto. On the same ghetto, we have Tadeusz Pankiewicz. He was a Catholic. And the Nazis asked him to leave. He said, no, I'm going to serve these people. He worked and gave them pharmaceutical needs and drugs and those kinds of things. He also helped smuggle and protect Jews from the ghetto. So even in the darkest of hours or years, in the case of the Jews living in the ghetto before going to Auschwitz, here is this little bit of light, someone living out their faith to take care of somebody that's from a different faith. And that's what we hold on to. That's the inspiration to keep doing what we do, to say we have our own faith, but we're going to respect and protect the other because it's in all of our interest. We're all minorities someplace. So let's work together so we can protect each other so this does not happen again.
The Eagle Pharmacy, also called Apteka Pod Orem, was the only pharmacy allowed to operate within the Krakow ghetto, becoming a quiet refuge for many. Just nearby in Podgórze is Oskar Schindler's factory, now a museum that tells the story of Krakow's wartime history and Schindler's efforts to save lives. Today, Podgórze and Kazimierz, linked by the Bernatek footbridge, remain deeply connected to Jewish history. Synagogues, memorials, and cobbled streets still speak of a once thriving community and the tragedies it endured. These neighborhoods are coming back to life with cafes, galleries, and a sense of renewal. But the absence of the Jewish, Roma, and other communities who once gave them their soul is still present. So moving forward, what is your hope for the next round of CCR builders and the communities that they'll shape?
Well, it's a good point. If you are crossing towards somebody, if you are understanding them as they understand themselves, and by the way, expecting them to cross towards you, that's what bridge building is. You cross towards each other across the common challenge, and they understand you as you understand yourself. The next step in terms of the framework, this academic framework born of this practical experience, is to really think through not just competencies of how to think about it, that can be taught in the classroom, but how do I provide and share experience with people who are going to go out and do this? So what we need next in building bridges, in building peace, in building mutual respectful engagement is better simulation, better role plays, better scenarios, where we can take on, I can play the role of somebody that I disagree with. And I read a little bit about their character and I'm required to play their part, and vice versa. So you begin to walk in the shoes of the other. Back to my example from Tibet, one metric of success was that the Chinese atheist, communist government officials from Beijing, from the top down, went all the way to Tibet, to the plateau itself. And by the end of our engagement there, They were literally walking in the shoes of the Tibetans because they put on the traditional Tibetan dress. That was unthinkable before this encounter began. And it took 5 years of building and crossing toward each other to create that moment where you saw party officials responsible for teaching on ethnicities at the top party school wearing a Tibetan outfit. The role of the outsider can bring these people together and be a bridge. But you need to have people who understand how to do that. That's why the role play in classrooms, and not just for adults, by the way, K through 12. Start learning this in kindergarten. Start having plays where you're different and understanding each other. That's what we need most.
You mentioned K through 12, teaching the next generation. How do you teach the next generation within the nuances of being able to have this comprehension of accepting and understanding who they are, and also being able to embrace one another?
Well, the key in cross-cultural religious literacy begins with the personal competency. Do I know my own faith at its richest and deepest best before I move into a comparative competency where I understand my neighbor's faith well enough to respect it? Not agree with it, but respect the faith as a function of the dignity, even if I disagree with the belief and the resulting behavior that comes with the faith. So how do I do that? The key is making sure that kids understand their own faith at its richest best. Secular people will say, let's take it all out of the equation. Let's just teach them stuff. Everybody learns together. Well, maybe that works. But if I have a young Christian kid who knows what he believes and a young Muslim who knows what they believe, then there's a better chance of this working, I think. It's a paradox because you would think they're going to try and be angry with each other. But kids are kids. They want to talk to each other. They want to share the differences. They want to play together. So we need them to have a firm understanding of their beliefs, which then leads to the question of when is it appropriate to introduce these kinds of ideas? That has to be determined by the local context. Maybe it's 4th grade, maybe it's 6th grade, maybe it's later because the situation is too raw because of a recent conflict. That the local decision is always going to be paramount and decide how programs get implemented.
How do the parents deal with this? Do you ever get backlash from the parents who are concerned? I ask this because I hear often from adults too, concern about engaging someone who believes differently because they're afraid. They're afraid that they might convert. They're afraid of compromising their beliefs. And then, of course, when you add their children into the fold, it's magnified. How do you navigate that?
It's a vital question. I'm the father of 5 children, ages 10 to 18. So I think about this all the time. And I teach a cross-cultural religious literacy course through the LYNC Institute to K through 12 teachers in Indonesia. So we've taught over 11,000 teachers in Indonesia, many of whom are teachers at a madrasa, a private Muslim school that is teaching Islam to its students, but sometimes they have Christian students. And I was just in Ghana where the same thing is happening, where you have Christian schools that have Muslim students and Muslim schools that have Christian students. So this is not just a local question for an American, it's a local question for people around the world. So the first thing is, yes, if I had my kids in a school where they were being told what Islam is and without any context, I would be upset and afraid. That's a natural reaction. But if the school has thought through how they're teaching this, teaching about the other religion so that they understand it, that's the first step. That's basic religious literacy, by the way, is I know enough about the other person's faith to say, okay, that's what a Christian is, or that's what a Christian believes. That doesn't mean that's what local Christians believe and do, but that's what in general a Christian or a Muslim believes. That's good to learn about the other. But cross-cultural religious literacy demands that you situate that knowledge about the other in the local context, which will always drive the answer to your question. So in some places, maybe we start younger where we have kids talk about what their faith means to each other. At what age? I don't know the answer to that because that depends on the local person. Maybe it's in college that you do that. Maybe it's at high school. We don't know. But in a perfect world, a mature student should have the confidence to talk about what their faith is in a classroom. Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Sikh, humanist, and say, I live in a country where I can do that. And the paradox here again is that actually increases security. It shouldn't increase fear. Now, a parent might first feel fear, but if they understand the whole context that when we express our beliefs, we're actually stronger, and nobody's trying to convert each other. You're sharing knowledge about what's important to the other person to build the relationship. I believe in America. Why can't I talk about why I believe in America? I believe in Jesus. Why can't I talk about why I believe in Jesus? And so you could say the same thing about any tradition. The point is, do the parents and the teachers and the kids have an understanding of what you're trying to do? Because if you just take a piece of that, that's going to cause fear. If you see the whole, you're going to reduce fear, and it's going to boost confidence of us all living together without killing each other.
As I take a much welcomed coffee break, I reflect on the paradox Chris highlighted, that being honest about our beliefs can actually bring us closer together. Now, as I head to Wawel Castle, a place that stood through centuries of conflict and renewal, I'm reminded of a lifelong principle. Confidence in our own identity is precisely what allows us to make space for someone else's.
Welcome to Wawel Castle, perched on a limestone hill just south of Krakow's main square and right next to the Wisła River. Here you can capture a glimpse of a wide range of Poland's story. The royal castle to my left, the cathedral spires right behind me, and a river that has carried kings, merchants, and legend.
Wawel became the seat of Polish kings in the 14th century when Casimir the Great rebuilt these fortifications in Gothic style and then Renaissance splendor. It's where monarchs were crowned, where Poland's first legal code was drafted, and where the nation kept hope alive even when it disappeared from maps.
One standout fact, inside the cathedral is the Zygmunt bell. The bell is so massive that it takes 12 ringers to ring its 8-ton bronze heart.
It rings only on Poland's most significant days, reminding everyone below that freedom isn't given once, it's renewed with every generation.
And that renewal is exactly connected to ideas around CCRL, how laws, leadership, and shared values can keep pluralism alive. Now let's meet up with Dr. Seiple again and head up and take a closer look at what history can teach
Hey, Jessica.
us. Hey,
Sorry, I had to change. It was so hot.
I should have done that too. Let's go this way.
Okay.
What about Poland gives you hope about the current state of the world?
Well, this place does. If you look at Wawel Castle here, they say it was first settled on the rock right in the middle of the Wisła River in the 8th century. And all of the empires that have come through here, they have never destroyed the castle and what it represents. And in and of itself, it represents faith. But it happens to contain a cathedral. And the faith of the Catholic, it happens to be the Catholic Church. And the faith of the people of Poland have been so resilient for so long, through the 123 years when they were not a country, through World War I, through World War II, through Soviet Russian occupation. They're still here, they're happy, the faith, it's powerful. And buried in Wawel is a guy by the name of Tadeusz Kościuszko. Kościuszko fought in our revolution. He came over here and had a revolution against the surrounding empires, the dictatorships, and they crushed him because he believed in freedom. So freedom and faith go hand in hand here in Poland. And Wawel Castle represents that most of all. And that shows the way forward. If we can keep freedom and faith, responsible freedom, responsible faith, responsible citizenship, we can take on anything, any global challenge with any person of any faith, even no faith. Poland offers us an example of freedom and of faith from times past through the toughest times to now and into the future. It's a model for themselves and for the region, and especially for the future of all of us. We all need to be resilient with faith and freedom together.
As our time with Chris comes to a close, we thank him for the wisdom he shared and send our best to his family back home. His practical steps for engaging across religious differences are grounded in decades of lived experience, including his early days in Krakow, where lessons from a time of communism, resistance, and quiet courage continue to shape his vision for connection today. With my time here also coming to an end, I'm left reflecting on the resilience of this remarkable city and the future still ahead of it. Its scars and its strength tell a story still unfolding, and I know I've barely touched the surface. When I arrived, I set out to uncover the power of care, what happens when it's present and when it's painfully absent. Krakow, with its beauty and its blemishes, has shown me that care isn't just compassion, it's courage. From quiet heroes who sheltered neighbors during the Nazi occupation to those who kept the truth alive about the Katyn massacre, Krakow reveals that even in the darkest moments, small acts of courage can carry profound hope. We can't solve every problem in the world, but perhaps our task is to keep caring, remembering, and lighting candles in the dark. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to keep seeing the humanity in one another.